Good morning, everyone. My name is Ellen. I'm a PhD student at the University of the State of Mato Grosso. This presentation is part of my thesis, in which I was trying to figure out the role of indigenous lands and conservation units to moderate the climate in the Cerrado, in the Amazon, in Brazil. So, deforestation is one of the main environmental change in the south of Amazon, this red region here in the map. And this region is also known as Arc of the Deforestation, and it represents the largest agricultural frontier in the country. And this deforestation here has already impacted the water and energy balance and can compromise the climatic future of the region, mainly in the state of Mato Grosso, because Mato Grosso is the largest the biggest producer of soy and meat in Brazil. The state is also divided in a mosaic of type of vegetations, ranging from forests typical from Amazon, savannas typical from Cerrado, and tropical landscapes as pastures and agriculture. The expansion of agriculture with replacement of native vegetation by pasture and croplands cause evapotranspiration reduction, increase in land surface temperature, and also can prolong the dry period, increasing the risk of fires, the loss of biodiversity, and even decrease in agricultural and economic productivity. About 50% of the area of the state of Mato Grosso has already been converted to agriculture or pasture, with an increase in almost 4 degrees in the temperature. These increases are only not greater because of the protected areas as indigenous land here in this figure that help to moderate the regional climate. Here you can see that inside the indigenous land the temperature is stable during the time, but outside we have an increase in the temperature, and because the effect of the lower temperature inside the protected area, it helped to reduce in almost 1 degree the regional temperature of the Xingu Basin. We also know that growth amplified the difference between the energy balance components of areas with native vegetation and agricultural areas. Here we can see in green the forests, and we see that even with the increase in the drought extreme, these areas it's capable to keep a more stable evapotranspiration, albedo, and temperature surface lower than areas with agriculture. But on the other hand, these areas converted to agriculture, as higher is the drought extreme, higher is the temperature and albedo, and lower is the evapotranspiration. So another important point is that the area of degraded forests in the Amazon is greater than the deforested area. So here we can see in this middle picture that the degraded area, it's almost the double of the deforested area that was cleaned between 2003 and 2014. So this process, such as forest fires, edge effects, and selective logging, can contribute to forest degradation inside protected areas, and these effects can persist long after the disturbance has occurred. After all this context, I bring you some questions. Conservation units and indigenous lands present higher evapotranspiration flux, lower temperature surface, and albedo, compared to multiple uses areas that are areas outside these protected areas that are expected to be more deforested. The second question is, due to differences in the management allowed in conservation units and indigenous lands, we expected higher evapotranspiration, lower temperature surface, and albedo in conservation units that was created with the purpose of preserving the environment, compared to indigenous lands that was created with the purpose of preserving the indigenous cultures and the resources necessary for their well-being. And the third question is, are external pressures changing the ability of conservation units and indigenous lands to regulate energy balance? To help answer that questions, we use a collection of satellite data from 2000 to 2020. Here we can see the resolution and the source of each data from surface temperature, evapotranspiration, and surface albedo. We use a critical analysis plus a case test to see when are differences between these components between protected areas and areas unprotected. And we also use a multiple linear model to try to figure out what are the main predictor of change in these components. And the predictor that we use are land use cover, precipitation, hotspots, burned area, and drought intensity. So, to answer that questions, we first separate the Mato Grosso state in Cerrado and Amazon, as you can see here, and we just compared conservation areas and indigenous lands inside the biome with the areas outside the protected areas in the same biome. And so we see that the surface temperature was higher both in Amazon and Cerrado unprotected than in conservation units and indigenous lands, and it was higher, 1.5 degrees higher. The albedo was 10% higher also in multiple uses areas compared to indigenous lands and conservation units. And the evapotranspiration was higher just in indigenous lands, was 10% higher in indigenous lands in the Amazon portion of the state. And to answer the second question, if conservation units have a higher evapotranspiration, a lower temperature surface, and lower albedo related to indigenous lands, we verify that conservation units has a lower temperature surface in the Cerrado portion of the state, but in opposite to what we are expecting, the conservation units in the Amazon has a lower evapotranspiration than indigenous lands, and in related to albedo, conservation units has a lower albedo both in Amazon and Cerrado portion of the state. And finally, our third question. Are external pressures changing the ability of conservation units and indigenous lands regulate the energy balance? What I saw is that in areas unprotected, the increase in temperature was almost 5 times higher than areas inside the protected areas in the Amazon portion of the state of Mato Grosso. Related to nighttime temperature, it's a thing really challenging because we can see that it's happening an increase both inside and outside these protected areas, and it is a thing that we need to care about because photosynthesis and carbon sequestration decrease with the increase of nighttime temperature, so it can compromise the productivity of crops and forests. Here we have another interesting variable because we can see that in the Amazon portion of the state, we face during this period increase in 6% of the albedo, while conservation units and indigenous lands had an albedo increase almost 5 times lower. But when we see Cerrado portion of the state, we had an increase of 3% in multiple uses areas, but in protected areas, conservation units and indigenous lands had a moderate decrease in albedo. We build multiple linear models to try and understand what are the predictors to change in temperature, surface, evapotranspiration, and albedo. And we verify that burned area had the greatest positive effect in land surface temperature, while conservation unities and native vegetation had the greatest negative effect on temperature. Uh, to evapotranspiration, the greatest positive effect was observed for native vegetation, and the greatest negative effect was to burned area. And to albedo, we verified that only native vegetation was selected with a negative effect in variable albedo. The takeaway of this work is that conservation unities and indigenous lands of the state of Mato Grosso are not just important reservoirs of plant biomass, but they also can provide vital ecosystem services that are important to agriculture and for human well-being. But the long-term maintenance of these ecosystem services can be compromised by the continued degradation and disturbance of native vegetation. Thank you all that was watching my presentation and for all my partners during this work.